Stephen Wilson, known as the Eye, led a quiet life, fully immersed in his job as a scout. His assignments have always been confusing, but this time it was much more complicated. He was assigned to follow his boss's socialite son to find out what kind of trouble he might have gotten himself into. Stephen didn't ask any unnecessary questions, just got down to business. He was a master of observation, always staying in the shadows, discreetly studying the behavior of his targets. After tracking the young man, he discovered that he often met with a woman named Joanna Eris. At first glance, she appeared mysterious yet attractive to Stephen. Her demeanor was graceful and confident, but behind her cold exterior lurked a danger he sensed almost immediately. As Stephen watched them meet, he witnessed a gruesome scene. Joanna killed her companion without showing the slightest emotion. Stephen froze, seized with a mixture of horror and admiration for her coolness. He knew he had a duty to report the crime and call for backup, but something stopped him. Instead, he decided to continue his surveillance. Joanna caught his attention not only as a criminal, but as someone hiding some deep wound. Stephen began to realize that she was not just a killer, but a person tormented by inner demons. His professionalism began to crack at the seams as he felt the urge to understand her rather than arrest her. Joanna led a troubled life, moving from town to town, leaving no trace behind her. Stephen followed her, discreetly watching her every move. He saw how easily she gained people's trust so that she could then deal with them in cold blood. At the Pennsylvania station in Pittsburgh, she committed another offense, but Stephen, being in the vicinity, could not stop her. His hesitation became even more intense. He felt both stalker and protector, wanting not to turn her over to the police but to save her. His obsession with Joanna began to intertwine with his personal pain. A few years ago, his ex-wife had taken their young daughter away and he hadn't seen her since. Stephen constantly dreamed that his daughter was near him, as if her ghost accompanied him. Looking at Joanna, he saw not a violent delinquent but a vulnerable girl who, like his child, needed protection. This illusion finally clouded his judgment. Traveling behind Joanna, he watched her every move. When she changed her clothes, changed images, shedding one face after another, Stephen saw it as an attempt to hide not only from the world, but from herself. He noticed her gaze, full of sadness, her slight smiles that seemed fake. She was a master of disguise, but Stephen felt that behind that facade lay a vulnerable soul. He couldn't forget when Joanna had approached her next victim at the railway station. Her actions were precise in cold blood, but something akin to regret flashed in her eyes. Stephen sensed that her murders were not cruelty for pleasure, but rather a manifestation of some inner struggle. Every time he saw her in action, he felt a stronger and stronger desire to understand her motives. At one point, he got too close. He started leaving signs for Joanna, trying to show his presence. One day, he sent her a gift of a child's toy, a symbol of his lost daughter, hoping she would understand his message. But Joanna took it as a threat and started looking for the one who was after her. The game of cat and mouse became increasingly tense. Joanna began to notice that someone was watching her and it was throwing her off balance. She became more cautious but also began to show signs of panic. Stephen, watching her reaction, had conflicting feelings. On the one hand, he wanted to get closer to her, but on the other, he realized that his actions might provoke her into another crime. Their paths crossed at another railway station where Joanna, sensing danger, decided to get rid of another companion who she thought might be a threat. Stephen was ready to intervene, but at the last moment stopped again. He thought he saw a plea for help in her eyes and it paralyzed him. As time passed, Stephen began to lose control of his life. His work became more and more secondary and his obsession with Joanna took over more and more of his thoughts. He saw her not only as an object of observation, but as a reflection of his own suffering. She became for him a symbol of lost time, lost family, and lost life. But their strange bond continued to develop. One day Joanna suddenly disappeared, leaving behind only a faint trace of her. Stephen felt he had lost not only the purpose of his assignment, but also a part of himself. He went in search of her, using all his skills to find her. When he finally found her, She was in a state of near collapse. Her life of deceit and violence had begun to crumble. Stephen realized that his job was not to arrest her, but to try and give her a chance at redemption. He approached her, breaking his own rules, and tried to talk to her. But Joanna, used to trusting no one, took him as a threat and tried to run away. Their last meeting was full of tension. Joanna stood on the edge, ready to throw herself into the void to avoid being caught. Stephen stepped closer, trying to convince her that he was not the enemy. His voice trembling, he said he understood her pain, that he wanted to help. But her fear and distrust proved stronger. She took a step back, and in that moment everything froze. Stephen was left alone, gripped by a sense of loss. He realized that his attempts to save Joanna were not only an attempt to help her, but also a way of dealing with his own demons. Joanna had become for him a reflection of everything he had lost, and her disappearance left him in a void from which there seemed to be no escape. This story left Stephen changed. He realized that his life of surveillance and covert operations was just a mask to hide his own pain. Joanna, despite everything she had done, became for him a symbol of redemption and hope that he had never been able to find.